Our story continues. They paused that night near the edge of a hillside tract that overlooked the vast jungles that surrounded the central region of Kajan. It naturally fell to Achilleos to hunt for game, while Mendone prepared the fires, and Cerynthia, Lilia, and Odyssean ventured out short distances for water and berries. Odyssean would at times venture out further than agreed. He savored the silence, for it offered him the ability to focus on something other than his predicament. His peace was abruptly shattered by the sound of rustling leaves. Odyssean instinctively reached for the knife that he had long lost, but immediately realized his folly when the form pushed through to him.
"I'm sorry,"
Lilia murmured, looking up at him.
I was frightened by myself. I wanted to be with you, Odyssean."
Odyssean's blood raced as she put an ivory hand on his own. Her eyes caught what light there was from the foliage and the moon, making them seem to glow like stars.
"There is nothing to be afraid of. Tomorrow, things will be better. You'll see."
It was an obvious lie, but the farmer had no idea what else to say.
"They will not. I think, Odyssean, there is only one way to prevent us from having to run and run forever. I said something of it before, and now that I have seen your wondrous gifts you possess, I think it now more than ever."
"Lilia."
"Please."
Without warning, the blonde woman kissed him. It was long and lingering, and filled Odyssean with yearning.
"We must go to the great city itself. You must speak to the people. Not the mage clans or the nobles, but the common folk. They will understand you."
My own village didn't understand me. They saw me as some kind of horrible monster.
"That was due to awful circumstances, Odyssean. If you go to the city, you start fresh. You have been given a gift most fantastic. They must be told."
And what? Am I supposed to preach to them? To follow me like some sort of god or spirit? Or I'll tear them apart, as I did the cathedral's men? What could I give them except fear and loathing?
Lilia's expression turned solemn. She stared deep into his eyes and said,
"You could give them the promise of becoming as you are, of becoming more than the cathedral or the triune could ever claim for them."
Of becoming like me?
The farmer could scarcely believe his ears. Was she mad?
Why would they want to become like me? To suffer as I have? For that matter, I still don't even know exactly if I believe it all in the first place.
Lilia placed a finger on his lips.
"Then test it again. One last time. Here and now."
Test.
"The final proof."
As she looked around the area for a moment.
"There. Something small, but significant. Impossible to deny."
The noblewoman led him to a bush, of the type for which they had been searching. However, this one was withered, and in addition to wrinkling leaves, it only had a few shriveled berries to offer.
What am I supposed to do?
"Touch it. Imagine what you want of it. That is all."
He recalled the last time that he had done what she asked. It was perhaps still possible to question what exactly had happened then, but here, though, he could not deny her. Imagine what you want of it. Odyssean nervously shrugged. What would he want from the bush other than some fresh berries? But the plant was long past that, and in fact it looked near dying. If it had been younger, full of life, surely it would have offered a bounty to them. He let his fingers graze the dry brush. The leaves and branches were brittle to the touch. The plant was not dying. It was dead.
Lilia.
She softly placed her hand atop his, keeping contact with the dead branches.
"Please, just this once more."
Despite his wariness, he wanted nothing more than to please her. With her hand still atop his own, the son of Diomedes thought of the bush and the juicy, ripe crop he would have liked to have found, enough to feed all of them. After the troubles he and the others had suffered in part due to these supposed powers, it was the least that he could ask. Odyssean suddenly tore his hand back from the bush. Unlike when he had concentrated on the storm over Sarum, there was no hesitation between his desire and the fruition of it. Even in the dim moonlight, the transformation he now beheld could not be mistaken for anything short of miraculous. The bush now stood swollen several times its emaciated size, and was now covered in lush leaves. From the few dried berries had burst a cornucopia of fresh, fat ones. They were not limited to the berries native to the bush either. Odyssean had blossomed at least a half-dozen distinct variations, which now filled the area with a sweet scent. In comparison to the storm, it was a small thing, but it forever put to death for the farmer any doubt that he wielded powers beyond his imagination. That very realization made him tremble as he had never done before. Not even when facing the guards of the cathedral.
Why do you shake so? Look.
The beautiful noblewoman reached out and snatched some of the berries. She thrust them into her mouth, eating with gusto. Her eyes widened in merriment as she ate.
Delicious! Taste for yourself.
Before he could decline, she tore off another bunch and brought them to his lips. Her face she had planted on his chest, her eyes ever on his own. Odyssean could do nothing but accept the bounty. Lilia placed the berries into his mouth, her fingers lingering there for a moment.
Taste them,
she repeated as she slowly removed her hand. Never in his life had Odyssean come across such flavor. Each berry seemed to be a treasure unto itself, as sweet as the sweetest wine.
The power within you should be feared only by those who envy you. When all others see it as the good it creates, they will understand, and then you can teach them.
Teach?
What I spoke before, to see the potential within them to be as you, to show them that they need not cow before the mage clan's temples and cathedrals. Odyssean, to know that within each one is a glory beyond the conceiving of any would-be prophet or cleric.
She paused.
I speak from knowledge, my love. You can show them the way. I know it. Watch. Watch.
She reached out to a tiny stem ending in an oval berry. It quickly swelled, then broke open, revealing a small, curled flower. That in turn opened wide.
It worked. I knew it. I felt it.
Her laughter was music.
I have felt it ever since you healed me, as if you somehow stirred to waking a force within. It is not so much compared to what you've accomplished, but it is something. You woke it in me, my love. Therefore, you can do the same for others. No false prophets will be able to fill their ears with lies after you are done. No one will ever be given empty promises, useless hopes, all because of you.
Her words seemed to swirl around him, both daunting and tempting. In his mind, he relived the deaths of his family and the cloying ways of the clerics who had come to take advantage of his grief. His anxiety and fear gave way to outrage again. Lilia pulled his face toward hers, barely a few inches from his.
Just how many more are there who have suffered like you, my dear Odyssean? You could see to it that it never happens again.
It's possible. No more clerics, no more triune, no more cathedral of light. Men would depend upon themselves, guide themselves. Odyssean simply grinned. He liked the sound of that.
And I will stand with you at all times. The two of us, together, always, always one.
She kissed him and led him to the soft ground. Cerinthia huddled by the fire on a small cloth, her meager find. Most of the berries were hardly edible, but at least they were there. She had found a few flowers worth eating, too. Mendone stood across from her, peering into the dark beyond the campfire. Achilleos was not expected for a while, but Odyssean and Lilia should have been back by now. Mendone, however, only worried for his brother's safety, while the thoughts of the trader's daughter were far more complicated.
She's with him,
she said, murmuring, in a tone hinting of an emotion that Mendone ever found uncomfortable. Women in Sarum had never found him of interest, and he, in turn, had never figured out exactly how to change that. It is possible, I suppose. I hope Achilleos can catch at least one rabbit. There was a little but dried rations in the guard's saddlebags.
I worry about him, Mendone. When that woman is with him, Odyssean seems to lose track of reason.
Surely not. I know my brother well. Cerinthia abruptly arose, causing her companion to step back slightly.
All she's got to do is whisper in his ear, and he follows her like a puppy.
Love will do that, he replied, before realizing what he had just said. To his horror, Cerinthia now gazed at him as if he had just shoved a dagger straight into her heart. What I meant to say is... Thankfully, his babbling was interrupted by the arrival of not Odyssean, but Achilleos. The hunter carried 2 rabbits and a bird in his left hand and wore a smile on his face that evaporated when he noted Cerinthia's expression. Sari? What? He looked from her to Mendone, and the burning gaze was enough to make Odyssean's brother feel like the next quarry in Achilleos' hunt. You told her? Mendone! How could you? Sari, I'm so sorry about your father. Mendone tried to wave him to silence, but it was too late. The terrible expression she had focused on the younger son of Diomedes was now turned against the archer.
What about my father?
Achilleos turned to Mendone as if he had not heard her. Help me make these ready. Mendone! Look, they'll take a while to cook, so we better work fast and...
Achilleos!
She stepped toward the archer between Mendone and himself.
What happened to my father? You know too, don't you?
Cerinthia, growing even more distraught.
Something's happened to him. I want to know what.
The hunter abandoned his catch and seized her by the shoulders. Mendone thought of doing the same, but as usual, when it came to dealing with women, he was generally a second behind the actions of other men. Sari. All of the merriment that Achilleos usually displayed had vanished from his face. Sari, Cyrus is dead.
No. No. No.
It is true, Mendone added cautiously. It was an accident.
How?
A portion of the roof torn off by the wind.
The wind.
Mendone feared that she would blame Odyssean, but instead, she slumped down by the fire again, putting her face in her hands, and began to cry. Achilleos went to her side first, putting a comforting arm around his companion. There was nothing but compassion and concern in either his expressions or his actions. Mendone was aware of just how much Achilleos cared for Cerinthia, more so than anyone else, including himself. Certainly, in a different manner than Odyssean, who never truly ceased seeing her as the young girl tagging along. But in a way, Mendone pitied the hunter. Here was one quarry all his skills could not catch for him. Feeling a bit uncomfortable, Mendone slipped away from the campfire. Achilleos had brought enough food, and once matters calmed, they could get to work in preparing it. For now, he thought it best to leave Cerinthia in the care of the archer. It wasn't so much that he had slipped away for the sake of the trader's daughter and Achilleos. No, it was also as much for his own peace of mind as he moved deeper into the dark. What would he have said next to Cerinthia? That her father had been calling for her after his death? That he could have sworn to have seen Cyrus standing above the wreckage of his own body? Slumping against a tree, Mendone tried to understand what was happening to him. The blackouts, the dirt on his fingers, and finally the voice and the vision. They all pointed to madness. Yet what he had witnessed around his brother could have also been called that. Certainly Odyssean appeared to think so. And Odyssean had clearly been wrong. Mendone carried proof of that himself. The savage scar left by the whip was no more. It had healed, possibly during the brothers' flight from Sarum. Certainly by the time they had stopped for the night, it had utterly vanished. Although the night air was cool, Mendone felt the sweat dripping down his face. Wiping it away, he tried to calm himself. His brother needed him more than ever now. He had to focus on that. Only on... He was being watched. Mendone spun to his right, and in that moment he glimpsed a figure in black robes and what seemed an odd, segmented armor. The face was utterly obscured by a tremendous hood. Then, just as with the shade of Cyrus, the figure was no longer there. He began to run, but a huge shape dropped down from the trees, landing on all fours in front of the farmer. Even crouched, it was nearly as high as the shoulders of Mendone was tall. When it stood, even hunched over, it was more than half again his height. The thing opened a mouth much like a frog's. The dim moonlight could not hide from the human the row upon row of dagger-like teeth, and the thick tongue darting from within. Above, half a dozen black orbs glistened with an unholy light, a light of their own.
Meat.
It rasped, extending two appendages ending in sharp claws as long as a human's hand. Behind this monstrosity thumped a thick tail, eagerly against the ground.
Come to me. Meat.
Mendone had no intention of obeying, but his body evidently had other, more horrific notions. First, one foot, then another. Slowly, inexorably, it dragged him toward the waiting talons of the fiend. A terrible stench filled his nostrils of what seemed like 100 years' worth of rotting carrion. The thing waiting as he neared it. It could have already ripped out his throat or disemboweled him, but from its rapid breathing, it clearly enjoyed the fear rushing through its victim. Mendone wanted to cry out, but could not. As the creature loomed over him, its maw dripping with saliva, an image flashed through Mendone's mind, an image of symbols familiar to him. They were akin to those on the ancient stone to which Achilleos had led him, with some new ones mixed in between. Oddly, where last time he had utterly failed to make sense of any of them, now Mendone knew how to pronounce each. The giant creature suddenly let out a snarl of confusion, one taloned appendage thrust just next to the stunned human. The beast sniffed the air, its mood clearly much angrier. It was only a moment after that the farmer now realized that the fiend was now blind. Mendone, now in control of his movements again, cautiously stepped to the opposite side and held his breath as the beast turned away from him. Mendone took another step further on. He must have made a sound, for the fiend spun in his direction and swiped the air with one massive paw. Although Mendone moved as quickly as he could, the tip of the talon caught the sleeve of his garment. He twirled helplessly in a circle before crashing to the ground. His mind took objection to the fact that the demon could hear. Somehow, Mendone felt that the blindness should have been accompanied by the deafness as well. As the creature reached for him, there was a shout followed by a hiss of an arrow. Mendone heard a thump followed by a furious snarl from the creature.
Move, Mendone! Move!
Achilleos called, as Mendone obeyed without shouting back. The eyes! It is blind for the moment, but shoot the eyes! Likely, he had not to tell the trained hunter what to do, but Achilleos had saved him, and Mendone owed his friend what little aid he could provide.
More meat. Where are you?
Achilleos let loose another arrow, but although blind, the creature sensed it coming and moved aside as the wooden shaft bounced harmlessly off its scaled hide. Mendone saw only then that the first bolt struck the monster under the arm. The rest of the creature's form was very much protected. As the archer readied another shot, the creature leapt like a frog in his general direction. However, from the monster's side, Cerinthia lunged forward, gripped in both hands a burning branch from the fire. Had the giant been able to see, she would have surely perished. but instead the blindness enabled the trader's daughter to bring the flames right against the vulnerable orbs. Its howl tore into the very soul of Mendone and ripped through the area. A new stench now filled the air, one of burning flesh. The injured fiend swung wildly. Cerinthia could not escape his reach, and the talons slashed her back. She crumpled to the floor and lay still.
Seri!
Like a man possessed, Achilleod fired upon the beast. This time, a bolt caught it in one of the other orbs. The giant howled anew, then tore the shaft from its ruined socket. As it turned again, Mendone realized that its sight had returned, and with that came another danger, one of which only he was aware. "Look not into its eyes, Achilleos. It will draw you to it, then—" His warning came too late. Achilleos stiffened. The bow dropped from his hands and the hunter's arms went slack as he stood motionless. The beast laughed, a terrible grating sound, and then reached for the helpless tidbit. However, its talons halted just before Achilleos, unable to touch the prey. The next moment, the earth beneath the fiendish creature seemed to liquefy. It tried to pull back, but its legs only sank in deeper. It looked around for the cause, but none was found.
What? Who?
Its gaze fixed on Mendone, the only one in sight, and without thinking, Mendone shook his head in denial. Nonetheless, the scaled horror tried to turn toward him to better focus its hypnotic ability. As it did, the liquid earth rose higher, as if impatient to take the beast. Mendone suddenly forgotten to the creature, it struggled to remove itself, but to no avail. As the ground crawled ever upward, quickly enveloping the torso, the creature tore at it, only to become ensnared even further within the solidifying honey. It began to use the other talon to try to break free, only to have those also caught. Within seconds, all that remained uncovered was a grotesque head, and the creature rasped.
Great Lucian, save your loyal servant. Save. Great Lucian, save.
With one final effort, the ground sealed over the frog-like mouth, finally entombing the victim. Achilleos let out a grunt, shook, then dropped to his knees. Mendone cautiously rose, not completely confident that the monster was no more. He moved to Cerinthia's side and gingerly inspected her wounds. They were horribly deep. But at least she was still alive. For how long that would be, though.
I'll see to her, Mendone. Don't you worry.
Uldyssian's voice suddenly said. Mendone eyed his elder brother with almost as much surprise as he had the beast. Despite the night, Uldyssian stood perfectly visible, as if an inner light illuminated him. He was bare-chested but seemed unmoved by the cool air. There was an odd look in Uldyssian's face, one that made Mendone feel even more insignificant than ever. As his brother knelt down by Cerinthia, Mendone involuntarily slunk back as if not worthy to be so close at such a time. Seemingly ignorant of his brother's reaction, Uldyssian placed his hands an inch above the wounds, while Mendone watched in wonder and curiosity. The terrible crimson valleys healed themselves, the ends first, as if tapered, drawing the wounds together as if by some invisible thread and needle. In many cases, going from over a foot long to a bare scar in less than 3 beats of Mendone's racing heart. One more beat, and Cerinthia's back became completely unmarred again. A slight moan escaped her and she began to stir. Nodding in satisfaction, Uldyssian stepped back, and his inner glow began to fade away. Achilleos, having the presence of mind to remove his own shirt and cover Cerinthia as she began to rise. Meanwhile, Mendone stood up to face his brother. What did you just do?
What had to be done, of course.
Uldyssian looked at him as if Mendone had just asked why the crops needed rain. But how? No, that's not what I meant, Uldyssian. Everything that happened in Sarum, was that you?
It must have been. And that I won't deny doing.
Motioning to all that remained of the abomination.
What was that thing?
Snapped Achilleos, still holding a stunned Cerinthia.
Those talons. And those eyes.
Lilia appeared from behind Uldissian, wrapping her arms around him possessively.
It is the murderer they sought in Sarum, obviously. The fiend that slew the missionaries. What else could it be?
Uldissian, Achilleos, and Cerinthia took her statement to heart, and even Mendone had to admit that it was an obvious statement. Certainly the condition of the acolyte corpses made sense now after seeing the horrible talons. The creature was also cunning. Surely it froze each victim with its gaze. It could also move extremely fast, which could explain the short time between murders. However, he found himself not entirely convinced. More to the point, something else about the abomination disturbed him. But how did it come here? We're so far from Sarum.
Why, it followed Uldissian, naturally. After all, everyone thought that he was the one to blame. If it slew him, then no suspicion of its foul existence would remain.
Again, another reasonable explanation. But for some reason Mendone could not see the creature pursuing Uldissian so far just for that. There had never been any suggestion by either the village or the Master Inquisitor that such an unnatural beast could be responsible. Everyone had thought the murderer to be human, and far too many had assumed it to be Uldissian. It called to somebody. At the end, it called to someone.
Aye,
Interjected Achilleos as he helped Cerinthia stand.
I heard it too.
Lilia's grip on Uldissian seemed to tighten.
It was nothing.
But Uldissian nodded to Mendone.
I heard it too, but the name escaped me.
Great Lucian. Lucian, I think. For some reason, merely speaking the name made Mendone shudder. That was the name. Unfortunately, knowing it meant nothing to him, nor did he see any recognition in the faces of anyone else. Not even when he closely studied Lilia's did he notice or see any hint of knowledge.
He must be with one of the mage clans. The murdered ones were emissaries from the temple and the cathedral. Who else would hunt such?
Uldissian declared as his eyes brightened dangerously.
Yes.
Lilia immediately agreed, but sounded to Mendone's ears almost as if she was pleased with his brother's quick thinking.
The mage clans. Surely them. Do you not agree, Mendone?
She gave him a smile, such as he had only ever seen for his brother. He felt himself flush. The mage clans, of course. Yet, Mendone wondered why any of the mage clans so desperate to hold their own against each other would bother with lowly emissaries in a backwater village to begin with. Everyone else seemed satisfied, while Uldissian looked around at everyone else as if they were his children.
We can worry about that later. This only proves my decision the right one.
Mendone had a bad feeling wash over him. Your decision?
Sarum is part of my past now, not my present or my future.
As Uldissian spoke, Lilia, leaving one arm around his waist, moved around to his side.
I never asked for this, but something's granted me this gift.
A gift? You call what happened a gift?
Hush, Mendone.
Mendone looked at Cerinthia in surprise. Of all the things that had happened, Mendone would have expected her to be the one to call recent events horrible and certainly not a gift. Yet now she seemed to speak with a tone of what he realized to be awe. Awe of Uldissian. Mendone then glanced toward Achilleos, but the hunter appeared unwilling to contradict the emotions of the woman he loved. His expression set.
A gift, yes.
Uldissian went on as if Mendone were but a child, in need of simple words.
Something inside all of us, in fact. Let's get back to the camp. I'll explain everything. Then, as soon as we're done eating, we need to get some rest. After all, the journey to Kajan will take several days of riding.
Kajan? Mendone nearly choked on the name. They were now going to Kajan. But what about the sea?
Kajan, where best to begin changing the world?
Uldissian repeated as he glanced down at Lilia. Mendone looked in dismay at Cerinthia and Achilleos. The world? Had he just heard his brother correctly? He looked toward the pair for some sort of help or understanding, but Cerinthia seemed caught between her awe of this new Odyssean and her jealousy of Lilia, while the hunter stared longingly at her. No one at the moment seemed to grasp the enormity of the moment properly, save for Mendone. No one seemed to see that his brother was surely heading towards certain doom, of very likely taking others with him. Malik angrily shut the tiny jeweled box he had been given by the Primus. The green circular gem situated in one of the 4 slots had crumbled to ash but a moment before, signifying the sudden worthlessness to the high priest. The hunter he had summoned was no more, but his anger was mixed with growing interest, for he had been sent to investigate these emanations that had been felt by his master, and if proved that they came from some person, he was to bring them back to the temple for study and possible conversation. At least now, Malik knew that he was not on some wild chase. Still, frowning, the tall cleric thrust the box back into his pouch on his belt and then returned to his horse. A hooded, armored peace warder handed Malik the reins, then retreated to his own mount. Behind them was a score of well-armored warriors of the faithful sat ready to ride wherever their leader commanded and to do whatever was necessary. They, of course, did not understand the entire truth concerning the Temple of the Triune, but they understood enough to know that to not succeed in this mission was unthinkable. Malik eyed them, seeking any weakness or hesitation, then looked ahead. The dark of night did not affect him. A gift from the Primus. Malik saw the path ahead as perfectly as he did during the day. They were not far from their goal, and the steeds granted to them by his master were swifter than any. Their appearance might be that of a sleek black stallion, but it was all an illusion. No mortal animal could have covered so much ground in so little time.
Forward,
Malik commanded, urging his own beast onward. The prize was not far. A demon might fail, but the high priest would not. Malik had risen to be the Primus's right hand without effort. His hands were stained with the blood of his rivals, both figuratively and truly. He would succeed. There was no other choice.